The massive space station called Arbitrium floated in the darkness between stars. It was neutral ground, a place where species from across the galaxy came to settle disputes without firing weapons. Today, representatives from 40 different worlds had gathered in its great chamber. They came to witness what many believed would be a historic moment, the moment when humanity learned its place in the universe. The chamber itself was enormous, with transparent walls that looked out into space. Ships from a dozen different species hung in formation around the station, their hulls gleaming with advanced technology. Energy shields shimmered around them like soap bubbles. Quantum drives hummed with barely contained power, ready to tear holes through reality itself and jump across light years in seconds. And then there was the human ship. The Perseverance arrived late, moving slowly through space on chemical rockets that made the alien observers shake their heads in disbelief. It was a bulky vessel, covered in thick plates of armor that looked primitive compared to the sleek energy shields other species used. Strange sensor arrays stuck out from its hull at odd angles. Its weapons appeared to be nothing more than metal tubes, kinetic accelerators that fired physical projectiles like something from a museum. Inside the chamber, the laughter started almost immediately. High Commander Zarthik stood at the center of the room, his chitinous body reflecting the light from the observation windows. He was Kreltar, a species that had been traveling between stars for over 10,000 years. His kind had fought in 100 wars across the galaxy and won most of them. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of that history. "Behold," he said, gesturing toward the Perseverance with one of his 4 arms. "The human delegation has arrived. I confess I expected something more impressive." The chamber filled with clicking, buzzing, and whistling, the sounds of alien laughter translated through dozens of different languages. A representative of the Confluence, a hive mind that controlled 17 colony worlds, spoke next. Its voice was a chorus of tones that somehow formed words. "They still use fusion drives," it said. "Fusion? The Kreltar abandoned that technology 8,000 years ago. The humans are children playing with toys they barely understand." Captain Elena Vasquez stood among the human delegation, her face showing no emotion. She was 53 years old, with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of years spent staring at star charts. She wore a simple uniform, dark blue with silver insignia. Nothing fancy. Nothing that would impress anyone in this room. Beside her stood Ambassador Chen, a thin man with careful eyes and a slight smile that never quite reached them. He watched the aliens mock the human ship with the patience of someone who knew something they didn't. Zarthix continued his speech. "Humanity has been in space for barely 2 of their centuries. 200 years. My species was building Dyson spheres when your ancestors were still living in caves. You claim rights to mine the neutron star remnant in the Viridian sector, but on what grounds? You have 1 slow ship with primitive weapons. We have 12 warships, each one capable of destroying a planet, each one faster than anything you can imagine." He turned to face Ambassador Chen directly. "I suggest you return to your home world and let the adults handle galactic affairs. This sector is beyond your capability to defend or develop." Other voices joined in. A gaseous being from the Trell Nebula spoke through a translation device. "Look at their ship. It has no quantum slip drive. It would take them years to cross the distance we travel in days. How can they possibly claim territory they cannot even reach efficiently?" A reptilian delegate from the Sorn Empire hissed in agreement. "Their weapons are laughable. Kinetic accelerators? What is this, the primitive age? We have plasma cannons that can melt through a moon. We have singularity missiles that create black holes. They have metal rods and chemical explosives." Ambassador Chen let them talk. He let them laugh. He stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back, his face showing nothing but polite attention. Only Captain Vasquez noticed the slight tension in his shoulders, the sign that he was ready to act. The diplomatic negotiations had been going on for 3 days. The Galactic Confederation wanted humanity to surrender all claims to the Viridian sector. The sector contained a neutron star remnant with rare elements that could revolutionize energy production. Multiple species wanted it, but the humans had been there first, establishing mining operations and claiming the territory according to Confederation law. The law was clear, but laws only mattered when you could enforce them. Zarthix made his final offer. "You have 1 solar rotation to withdraw your claim and remove your ship from the sector. If you refuse, my fleet will escort you out, by force if necessary. He leaned forward, his compound eyes glittering. I am trying to be merciful, humans. Do not mistake my restraint for weakness. The chamber fell silent. Every delegate waited to see how the humans would respond. Some expected them to surrender immediately. Others hoped for defiance. It would make the inevitable human defeat more entertaining. Ambassador Chen finally spoke. His voice was quiet but clear, carrying easily through the vast chamber. High Commander, we appreciate your concern for our welfare. However, we will not be withdrawing our claim. The chamber erupted in surprised murmurs. Zarthix's body language showed confusion. You cannot be serious. You have one ship. We have 12. Your vessel cannot even outrun our slowest transport. What do you hope to accomplish? We hope, Chen said calmly, to demonstrate something important. Captain Vasquez, please prepare for the demonstration. Vasquez tapped a control on her wrist. Acknowledged, Ambassador. Beginning demonstration protocols. Zarthix made a sound like gravel grinding together. Kreltar laughter. A demonstration of what? How slowly you can move. How poorly your primitive weapons perform. Other aliens joined in the laughter. This was better than they had hoped. The humans were going to embarrass themselves completely. Through the observation windows, the Perseverance began to move. Not toward the alien fleet, that would have been expected. Instead, it maneuvered into an odd position, its nose pointing at an empty patch of space where nothing existed. They are aiming at nothing, the Confluence observed. Have they gone mad? Vasquez's voice came through the chamber's communication system. We are ready, Ambassador, Chen nodded. Proceed. The Perseverance fired. A streak of light shot from one of its kinetic accelerators. The projectile, a simple metal rod, flew off into space at tremendous speed. It didn't hit anything. It didn't explode. It just kept going, disappearing into the darkness. The chamber was silent for a moment. Then the laughter returned, louder than before. They missed, someone shouted. They fired at nothing and hit nothing. Zarthix's body shook with amusement. Is this your demonstration? Even your targeting systems are worthless. That projectile will travel through space forever, hitting nothing, accomplishing nothing. Ambassador Chen's smile widened slightly. High Commander, I need you to understand something very important. That projectile will not travel forever. It will hit something very specific, in approximately 9 minutes and 47 seconds. What could it possibly hit? Zarthix demanded. There is nothing in that direction for millions of kilometers. Not yet, Chen agreed. But there will be. You see, Commander, we have been studying this sector for 3 months. We know every gravitational field, every orbital path, every movement of every object. We have calculated trajectories that you cannot imagine. The aliens didn't understand. They thought the humans were bluffing or insane. Captain Vasquez checked her instruments. 9 minutes until impact, she announced calmly. 3 months earlier, the Perseverance had been in orbit around Earth's moon. The Luna Orbital Shipyard was humanity's largest construction facility in space, a massive structure of metal and carbon fiber that glittered against the black sky. Ships came here to be built, repaired, and equipped for deep space missions. Dr. Yuki Tanaka stood on the observation deck, watching technicians install the final weapon systems on the Perseverance. She was the ship's chief weapons officer, a small woman with sharp eyes and hands that were always moving, always calculating. Beside her stood Ensign Marcus Webb, fresh from the academy and eager to learn. I don't understand, Webb said, looking at the weapons being loaded onto the ship. These are just kinetic accelerators, metal rods fired at high speed. Every other species in the galaxy has moved beyond this technology. They have energy weapons, quantum torpedoes, singularity missiles. Why are we still using what they consider primitive weapons? Tanaka smiled. She had been expecting this question. Tell me, Ensign, have you studied the history of galactic warfare? Yes, ma'am. The major species have been fighting each other for thousands of years. They have sophisticated tactics, powerful weapons, and ships that can cross the galaxy in days. And where do they fight these wars? Webb looked confused. In space, ma'am. No, Tanaka said. They fight in the gaps between spaces. They jump from star to star using quantum drives. They fight near planets and stations where quantum drives work. But they never really fight in the deep vacuum. They never fight in true space. She pulled up a holographic display that showed the solar system. Humanity spent 200 years confined to this system. We couldn't develop faster than light travel. We were stuck here fighting wars around Earth, Mars, the asteroid belt. Jupiter's moons. We learned to fight in places where quantum drives don't work. Too close to gravity wells, too much interference. We learned to fight using physics alone. Tanaka expanded the display to show a complex web of trajectories. We learned orbital mechanics. We learned to calculate where an object would be hours or days after we fired it. We learned patience. A battle in the asteroid belt might take weeks, with projectiles flying through space on carefully calculated paths. You fire at where your enemy will be, not where they are. Webb stared at the trajectories. But the other species are faster than us. They can dodge, can they? Tanaka asked. Speed means nothing if you're moving in a predictable pattern. And everyone moves in predictable patterns, physics demands it. If you're orbiting a planet, we can calculate your path. If you're accelerating, we can measure your velocity and predict your position. The faster you go, the harder it is to change direction without killing your crew from the G-forces. She zoomed in on one section of the display. Look at this. This is a simulation of a battle between a human ship and a Kreltar destroyer. The Kreltar ship is 3 times faster. It has energy shields and plasma cannons. On paper, it should win easily. The simulation played out. The Kreltar ship charged forward, firing brilliant streams of plasma. The human ship fired a single kinetic round and then retreated slowly. The plasma hit the human ship's armor, scorching it but not penetrating. The Kreltar ship circled around for another attack and flew directly into the path of the kinetic round that had been fired 60 seconds earlier. The simulation showed the Kreltar ship breaking apart, destroyed by a simple metal rod traveling at a fraction of light speed. They think in terms of naval battles, Tanaka said. Ships maneuvering, firing broadsides, retreating and advancing. But space isn't an ocean. There's no water resistance, no friction. A projectile fired in space doesn't slow down. It doesn't drop. It just keeps going until it hits something. Webb was beginning to understand. So we're not trying to match their technology. We're using physics against them. Exactly. Let them have their energy shields. Shields are designed to stop energy weapons, not solid matter traveling at relativistic speeds. Let them have their speed. Speed just means they hit our projectiles harder. We've spent 2 centuries becoming masters of ballistic warfare. They've forgotten that such warfare even exists. Back in the present on the Arbitrium station, the countdown continued. 8 minutes to impact, Captain Vasquez announced. High Commander Zarthix had stopped laughing. Something about the human certainty was unsettling. He ordered his ships to run scans of the space around them, looking for what the humans might have targeted. There is nothing there, his tactical officer reported. The projectile is traveling through empty space. But Zarthix had not survived 100 battles by ignoring his instincts. All ships prepare for evasive maneuvers. Power up weapon systems. Ambassador Chen watched the alien fleet respond with the same calm smile. High Commander, may I explain something? You have mocked our ship for being slow. You're right, we cannot match your quantum slip drives. But here's what you don't understand. Speed is relative. He activated a holographic display that showed the current positions of all ships in the sector. Your ships can accelerate to tremendous velocities. You can jump across light years. But you think in terms of going from point A to point B as fast as possible. You've forgotten that space is 3-dimensional. You've forgotten orbital mechanics. Chen zoomed in on the trajectory of the projectile that the Perseverance had fired. That projectile is traveling at 0.03 light speed. Not fast by your standards, but it's not slowing down. It's not stopping. And we calculated its path based on the gravity of this station, the gravity of the nearby asteroid field, and the predicted positions of every ship in this sector. Predicted positions, Zarthix said. We are not moving in a predictable pattern. Yes, you are, Chen said. Your flagship is maintaining a standard diplomatic formation, position Delta 7 according to Confederation military doctrine. You've been holding that position for 3 days. We've been calculating for 3 months. 7 minutes to impact, Vasquez said. Zarthix felt a chill run through his body. Tactical. Calculate where that projectile will be in 7 minutes. His tactical officer worked quickly, feeding data into the ship's quantum computer. The answer came back in seconds. The officer's voice was shaken. Commander, if we maintain current position, the projectile will pass within 300 meters of our flagship. 300 meters is a miss, Zarthix said, but his voice lacked confidence. Not if you move, Chen said quietly. You're going to move, High Commander. In approximately 2 minutes, one of your patrol ships is going to complete its circuit and return to formation. Standard procedure requires you to adjust position by 50 meters to give it clearance. You've done the same maneuver every 6 hours for 3 days. Zarthix stared at the human. You cannot possibly have calculated that. We can. We did. We've been watching you for 3 months. We know your procedures, your formations, your habits. And we know that in 5 minutes and 30 seconds you're going to move your flagship directly into the path of our projectile. This is insane, Zarthix said. But he checked the patrol schedule. A ship was indeed returning to formation, and procedure did require him to adjust position. 6 minutes to impact, Vasquez announced. The patrol ship appeared on sensors, returning from its circuit of the sector. It requested permission to dock. Zarthix had 2 choices. He could break protocol and refuse to move, proving the humans wrong. Or he could follow standard procedure and potentially prove them right. But if he broke protocol, he would look afraid. He would look like the humans had gotten into his head. Pride made his decision. Maintain normal procedures. Helm, adjust position for docking clearance. The flagship moved 50 meters to starboard. Chen's smile widened slightly. 5 minutes to impact, Vasquez said. 4 minutes. 3 minutes. Zarthix's tactical officer was tracking the projectile now. Commander, the trajectory has changed. The projectile passed through the gravity well of the station and curved. It's heading directly for us now. Impossible, Zarthix said, but his instruments didn't lie. They calculated the gravity well effect, the tactical officer said, his voice filled with disbelief. They fired the projectile knowing it would curve around the station. They predicted we would move. They calculated everything. 2 minutes to impact, Vasquez said calmly. Helm, evasive maneuvers. Zarthix ordered. Which direction, Commander? Zarthix hesitated. If the humans had calculated this much, they had calculated his evasive options too. Any direction he chose might be exactly what they predicted. 1 minute to impact. Full reverse thrust, Zarthix commanded. The flagship's engines flared to life, pushing the massive ship backward. For a moment, it seemed like they would escape. The projectile's trajectory would miss them by meters. Then Captain Vasquez spoke again. Correction, High Commander. We didn't fire 1 projectile. We fired 3. The other 2 were fired from different angles. We calculated all possible evasive maneuvers. On the sensors, 2 more projectiles appeared, coming from different vectors. They had been too small to detect at long range. Now they were close enough to track. Zarthix had reversed directly into the path of the second projectile. Impact in 10 seconds, Vasquez announced. The chamber on Arbitrium Station went completely silent. The tungsten rod was 3 meters long and 10 centimeters in diameter. It had no explosives, no guidance system, no sophisticated technology at all. It was just dense metal traveling at 3% of light speed. That velocity gave it kinetic energy equivalent to several nuclear weapons. The rod hit Zarthix's flagship exactly where the Perseverance had calculated it would hit. The reactor housing, where the ship's energy shields were weakest due to the radiation shielding that had to allow some penetration for heat dissipation. The impact lasted less than a microsecond. The kinetic energy transferred into the flagship's hull instantly, converting to heat faster than the ship's systems could register. The reactor housing didn't explode in the traditional sense. It simply ceased to exist as solid matter. The tungsten rod vaporized along with 10 meters of the ship's hull, the reactor itself, and everything within a 50-meter radius of the impact point. The shock wave tore through the rest of the flagship. Bulkheads crumpled like paper. Atmosphere vented into space. The ship's structure, designed to withstand plasma cannon fire and energy weapons, had no defense against pure kinetic force delivered at relativistic speeds. High Commander, Zarthix had exactly enough time to realize the humans had been right before his consciousness ended. On Arbitrium Station, every delegate stared through the observation windows in complete silence. Where a flagship had been, there was now only expanding debris and a cloud of vaporized metal cooling rapidly in the vacuum of space. Ambassador Chen's voice cut through the silence. That was not a demonstration of our weapons. That was a demonstration of mathematics. The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates shouted in dozens of languages. Some demanded immediate retaliation. Others called for emergency evacuation. A few simply stood frozen, unable to process what they had witnessed. Captain Vasquez's voice came through the communication system, calm and clear. Attention all vessels in the Viridian sector. The Perseverance has fired 147 kinetic projectiles over the past 3 hours. Each projectile is currently traveling on a calculated trajectory. Current positions and vectors are being transmitted now. We recommend you do not deviate from your current flight paths without consulting this data. One of Zarthix's officers, now in command of what remained of the Kreltar fleet, screamed over the communication channel, "You murdered our High Commander." "This is an act of war." "Your High Commander issued a threat of violence," Chen replied. "He stated that his fleet would remove us by force. We responded to that threat. I would also note that we broadcast our intentions clearly. We said we would provide a demonstration. We did not fire until Commander Zarthix ordered his ships to prepare weapons." The acting Kreltar commander hesitated. Chen was right. By Confederation law, Zarthix had made the first threat. The humans had simply responded. "It doesn't matter," the commander said. "You have 11 more ships to face. Your slow vessel cannot stand against our fleet, can't we?" Vasquez said. "Let me explain your situation. As I mentioned, we have fired 147 projectiles. They are now positioned throughout this sector in a spherical pattern around this station. Some are traveling fast, some are traveling slowly, some are in wide orbits, some are in tight spirals. Every escape vector from this sector now has projectiles traveling through it." She paused to let that sink in. "Your ships are fast, faster than ours, but that's your problem. The faster you go, the harder you'll hit the projectiles in your path. And your energy shields? They're designed to stop plasma, lasers, particle beams. They're useless against solid matter traveling at these velocities." "You're bluffing," the Kreltar commander said. "You cannot possibly track 147 projectiles." "We've provided the trajectory data," Vasquez said. "Check it yourself." The Kreltar tactical officers began analyzing the data. What they found made their situation terrifyingly clear. The humans weren't bluffing. The projectiles were real, and their positions matched the transmitted data perfectly. The Perseverance had turned the entire sector into a trap. A new voice entered the communication channel. It was Ixthor, Zarthix's second-in-command and his most aggressive officer. "This is cowardice. You hide behind mathematics and long-range weapons. Face us in honorable combat." "Honor?" Chen said quietly. "You came here with 12 warships to intimidate a diplomatic mission. You threatened violence against a single vessel, and when we defended ourselves using superior tactics, you call it dishonorable?" He shook his head. "We have no interest in honor as you define it. We're interested in survival and protecting our interests. You're welcome to try to reach us through the projectile field, but I guarantee you'll lose more ships in the attempt," Ixthor snarled. "All ships attack formation. We'll show these primitives what real warfare looks like." 5 Kreltar destroyers moved to join Ixthor's flagship. They formed a tight formation and accelerated toward the Perseverance. Vasquez watched them come with no apparent concern. Trajectory analysis complete. They're using attack pattern Theta 9. It's in the Confederation military database, listed as optimal for assaulting a stationary target with numerical superiority. "Will they hit any projectiles?" Ambassador Chen asked. 3 of them will. The flagship will avoid them if they maintain exact formation. But they won't maintain exact formation. Theta 9 calls for a dispersion pattern at 2,000 kilometers. When they separate, 2 more ships will enter projectile paths. She was right. At 2,000 kilometers, the Kreltar ships split apart to attack from multiple angles. The maneuver was standard. It prevented a single defensive weapon from targeting all ships simultaneously. The first destroyer hit a projectile 8 seconds later. The impact tore through its bow, sending the ship spinning out of control. Secondary explosions rippled through its hull as power systems failed. The second and third destroyers met similar fates, each one flying into the path of projectiles that had been fired hours earlier. The Perseverance had predicted not just their approach vector, but their exact tactical doctrine. Humans had studied Confederation military tactics for years, learning every standard formation, every recommended maneuver. Ixthor watched 3 of her ships die in the span of 30 seconds. She screamed orders to the remaining vessels. Break formation. Random evasive patterns. But random patterns weren't truly random. Ships had limited fuel, limited time, limited options. Every random movement was constrained by physics, by the ship's capabilities, by the pilot's training. And the Perseverance had calculated the probability space of all possible movements. One of the remaining destroyers tried to dodge left and accelerated directly into another projectile. The impact split the ship in two. Ixthor's flagship and the final destroyer managed to avoid the immediate projectiles, but now they faced a new problem. To reach the Perseverance, they had to pass through a dense field of tungsten rods, each one traveling at lethal velocities. Every movement was a gamble. Every course correction might put them in the path of a projectile they couldn't see until it was too late. "Cease fire," the acting fleet commander ordered. "Ixthor, return to formation." "Never!" Ixthor shouted. "We are Kreltar. We do not flee from primitives." Her ship pushed forward, weaving through the projectile field with desperate skill. Her pilot was excellent, dodging 3 more rods that would have destroyed them. They closed to within 5,000 kilometers of the Perseverance, close enough to fire their plasma cannons effectively. "Target acquired," Ixthor said. "Fire all weapons." Streams of superheated plasma shot from her ship's cannons, crossing the distance to the human vessel in seconds. The plasma hit the Perseverance's hull with tremendous energy, and the human ship barely registered the damage. The armor plating that the aliens had mocked, thick, bulky, primitive, was ablative composite designed specifically to absorb and dissipate energy weapon fire. The plasma scorched the surface but couldn't penetrate. Under the ablative layers were heat sinks, radiation shields, and redundant hull plating. The ship had been built to take hits. "Their armor is stronger than expected," Ixthor's tactical officer reported. "We're not penetrating." "Then get closer," Ixthor commanded. "We'll fire at point-blank range." But getting closer meant passing through more of the projectile field. The destroyer accompanying her flagship tried to follow and hit a projectile traveling in a retrograde orbit, one moving opposite to the general flow of the others. The collision was head-on, and the combined kinetic energy obliterated the destroyer instantly. Ixthor's ship was now alone, deep in enemy territory, surrounded by invisible projectiles on calculated trajectories. "Ixthor, retreat now," the fleet commander ordered. "That's a direct order." Ixthor hesitated. Every instinct told her to keep fighting. The Kreltar had never retreated from a weaker species. But 5 ships were gone. 5 ships destroyed without the humans firing a single shot in direct combat. They had simply seeded the battlefield with metal rods and let physics do the rest. "Retreating," she finally said, her voice bitter with shame. But retreating was not simple. The path she had taken into the battle zone was now filled with projectiles that had drifted into those trajectories. She had to find a new path out. Ambassador Chen stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by delegates from 40 different species. The observation windows showed the debris field where Zarthix's flagship had been, a stark reminder of what had just happened. The mood in the room had changed completely. The laughter and mockery were gone, replaced by fear and grudging respect. "Our terms are simple," Chen said. "We maintain our mining rights to the neutron star remnant in the Viridian sector. We establish a permanent human presence in this region, and the Galactic Confederation recognizes humanity's right to defend its interests using whatever methods we deem appropriate." A delegate from the Soren Empire, the reptilian species that had mocked human weapons earlier, spoke up. His voice was careful now, measured. "You destroyed 5 warships. You have approximately 140 projectiles remaining in this sector. Do you intend to keep them active as a threat?" "The projectiles will remain active until we've completed our mining operations," Chen replied. "However, we've provided complete trajectory data to Confederation traffic control. Any ship that follows the safe corridors will have no problems. Think of it as traffic management." "Traffic management," the Soren delegate repeated slowly. "You've turned an entire sector of space into a weapon grid and call it traffic management. Is it so different from the minefields and defense stations your species uses?" Chen asked. "The only difference is that our weapons are kinetic and follow predictable paths. Actually, that makes them safer. You know exactly where they are and where they'll be. You can plan around them." The Confluence spoke next. "You said you've been preparing for 3 months. How long have you been planning this confrontation?" Chen smiled. "We've been planning since the moment we decided to expand beyond our solar system. We knew we'd face species with superior technology. We knew we'd be outnumbered. So we focused on what we could control: mathematics, planning, and patience. Dr. Tanaka's voice came through the communication channel from the Perseverance. If I may add something, Ambassador, I think the Confederation delegates need to understand the philosophy behind our approach. Please proceed, Doctor, Chen said. Tanaka's hologram appeared in the center of the chamber. She looked small compared to many of the alien delegates, but her presence commanded attention. Most of you have had faster-than-light travel for thousands of years. You fought wars across multiple star systems. You think in terms of rapid deployment, quick strikes, and overwhelming firepower. These are valid tactics when you have technological superiority. She brought up a holographic display of Earth's solar system. Humanity developed differently. We were trapped in one star system for 2 centuries. We fought wars around planets and moons where FTL drives don't function properly. We had to learn to fight using only conventional physics. No quantum tricks. No exotic particles. Just Newton's laws and Einstein's relativity. The display zoomed in on the asteroid belt. We fought a war in this region that lasted 37 years. Battles took weeks or months because projectiles traveled for days before hitting their targets. Commanders had to think not just about where the enemy was, but where they would be hours or days later. We learned to fight battles that existed in 4 dimensions, 3 spatial and 1 temporal. A new delegate spoke, one who hadn't participated in the earlier mockery. She was from the Varan technocracy, a species known for its scientific achievements. You're saying that your limitation became your advantage. You couldn't develop FTL technology, so you perfected sublight combat, to a degree that FTL-capable species never needed to. Exactly, Tanaka said. When you can jump across the galaxy in hours, why bother perfecting the ability to calculate trajectories across millions of kilometers? Why spend decades studying orbital mechanics when you can just quantum slip to your destination? Your technology allowed you to skip over skills we had to master. The Varan delegate nodded slowly. And now those skills make you dangerous in ways we never anticipated. Your ship is slow, but the battlefield was prepared in advance. Your weapons are primitive, but they're already in position. By the time we arrived to confront you, you'd already won the battle. Not just this battle, Vasquez's voice added. We've been seeding projectiles throughout this entire sector for 3 months. We have weapons positioned along every major shipping lane, near every strategic resource, around every planet. Most of them are just sitting in stable orbits waiting. The chamber went silent as the implications sank in. That's impossible, the acting Kreltar commander said. We would have detected such a massive deployment of weapons. Would you? Vasquez asked. You're looking for energy signatures, quantum distortions, radiation emissions. Our projectiles are just metal rods drifting through space. They're cold, inert, and unless you're specifically looking for them with visual or radar detection, they're nearly invisible. Space is big. Finding a 3-meter rod of tungsten in all that emptiness is like finding a specific grain of sand in a desert. She pulled up a tactical map of the entire sector. Red dots appeared, scattered throughout the region. There were thousands of them. These are all the projectiles we've deployed. Some are on collision courses with strategic targets. Some are in standby orbits. Some are decoys, just chunks of rock instead of tungsten. But you can't tell which are which without checking each one individually, and there are 4,000 of them. The Sorn delegate stared at the map. This is beyond what we thought possible. Your single ship deployed 4,000 projectiles. We had 3 months and a manufacturing facility on a captured asteroid, Vasquez said. Simple kinetic weapons don't require exotic materials or complex assembly. We've been using mineral resources from the asteroid belt to produce ammunition. It's the same process we've used in our own solar system for decades. Ambassador Chen stepped forward. Let me be clear about something. We don't want to fight the Confederation. We want to mine resources and develop our presence in this sector. But we won't be bullied or intimidated. We've shown you that our methods, while different from yours, are effective. We've proven that we can defend our interests. You've proven you can ambush unprepared opponents, Ixthor said bitterly. She had returned to the station after her retreat, though she remained in her ship rather than joining the delegates in person. But what happens when we adapt? When we learn to counter your tactics? That's a fair question, Chen said. And the answer is that we'll adapt too. We've had 200 years of fighting in our solar system. We've developed tactics for every scenario. Kinetic weapons are just one tool in our arsenal. We have others. He nodded to Captain Vasquez, who brought up a new display. This is a simulation of a defensive grid we can deploy around any station or planet. It uses thousands of small projectiles in overlapping orbits. creating a shell that's nearly impossible to penetrate at high speeds. The faster you try to approach, the more likely you are to hit something. Another display appeared. This is a siege scenario. We position projectiles in distant orbits with years-long trajectories. They drift through space completely undetected until they arrive at their targets. We could fire a weapon today that doesn't hit until 5 years from now. A third display. This is an interdiction pattern. We place projectiles along major shipping routes with small maneuvering thrusters. They're dormant most of the time, but if activated, they can adjust their trajectories to intercept passing ships. One ship could blockade an entire trade route. The delegates were beginning to understand the full scope of what humanity had developed. These weren't just weapons, they were an entirely different approach to space warfare. The Varan delegate spoke again. You've essentially weaponized space itself. You're not bringing weapons to the battlefield, you're making the battlefield itself a weapon. Yes, Chen agreed. And the beauty of it is that it's all based on technology you consider primitive. There's nothing here that violates Confederation weapons treaties. No quantum singularities. No antimatter warheads. No planet-killing devices. Just metal rods following Newton's laws. Yet 5 warships are destroyed, the Kreltar commander said. Because they didn't respect those laws, Chen replied. High Commander Zarthix thought speed and firepower were enough. He didn't consider that we might have been preparing the battlefield for months. He didn't think about the implications of fighting in a region we'd been occupying for longer than he'd been here. The Confluence interjected. We understand your capabilities now. We acknowledge that humanity has developed effective defensive strategies, but this cannot be a sustainable solution. You cannot seed every sector of space with projectiles. You cannot turn the entire galaxy into a weapons grid. We don't want to, Chen said. We want what every species wants: security, resources, and the ability to grow. We're willing to be partners with the Confederation, but we need to be respected as equals, not dismissed as primitives. An older delegate, one from a species called the Archivists who rarely spoke, finally entered the conversation. The Archivists were historians, dedicated to recording galactic events. I believe I understand what has happened here. The younger species in the galaxy, by which I mean those with faster-than-light travel for less than 20,000 years, have forgotten an important lesson. The negotiations took another 6 hours. The delegates argued, debated, and discussed the implications of what had happened. Some wanted to punish humanity for destroying the Kreltar ships. Others argued that Zarthix had made the first threat and humanity had simply defended itself. A few suggested that humans should be expelled from the sector entirely, while others recognized that such an action would be impossible now. In the end, pragmatism won. The Confederation couldn't afford to fight a species that had turned an entire sector into a weapon. More importantly, several delegates realized that humanity's methods could be useful. The ability to defend territory without massive fleets was attractive to smaller species who couldn't compete militarily with the major powers. The final treaty was surprisingly fair. Humanity retained mining rights to the Viridian sector. In exchange, they agreed to share trajectory data for all projectiles in the region and maintain safe corridors for Confederation shipping. They also agreed to provide technical consultation to other species interested in learning human defensive tactics for a price, of course. But the most significant outcome was unstated. Humanity had earned respect through demonstration rather than diplomacy. The galaxy now understood that Earth was not a primitive backwater to be ignored or bullied. As the delegates filed out of the chamber, Ambassador Chen stood with Captain Vasquez, watching the alien ships prepare to depart. Most were giving the Perseverance a wide berth now. We made a lot of enemies today, Vasquez said quietly. We also made some friends, Chen replied. The Varan technocracy asked for a private meeting tomorrow. They want to discuss joint research projects. The archivists requested permission to document our combat methods for their historical records. Even some of the smaller Confederation species are reaching out. And the Kreltar? Chen looked at the remaining Kreltar ships, now under the command of Ixthor. They'll be back. Maybe not this year or next year, but eventually. They won't forget what happened here. Neither will we, Vasquez said. Neither will we. On board Ixthor's ship, the young commander stared at the tactical displays showing the human projectile field. Her first officer stood beside her waiting for orders. What do you see? Ixthor asked. The officer studied the display. I see a clever trap. I see tactics we didn't anticipate. I see 5 dead ships. Look deeper, Ixthor commanded. The officer looked again. I see. Patience, planning. They were here for 3 months before we arrived. They prepared the battlefield completely before the first shot was fired. Exactly, Ixthor said. We came with superior ships, superior weapons, and superior speed. But they came with superior preparation. We thought the battle would begin when we arrived. They knew it had already ended before we got here. She deactivated the display. High Commander Zarthix died because he didn't respect them. He saw their slow ship and primitive weapons and assumed they were weak. He forgot the first rule of warfare. Never underestimate your enemy. What will we do? The officer asked. Ixthor was silent for a long moment. We'll learn. The humans have shown us something we'd forgotten. Speed is not always victory. Sometimes the patient hunter wins. We'll study their methods. We'll adapt. And when we meet them again, it will be different. She looked out at the Perseverance, still hanging in space like a patient predator. Tell the fleet to maintain safe distance. Request trajectory data from human vessel, and begin analysis of their combat doctrine. If they can learn to fight in space better than species who've been spacefaring for millennia, then we can learn from them. Back on Earth, news of the confrontation spread quickly. The media called it everything from the Viridian incident to the battle that wasn't. Military analysts pored over the combat footage, studying every detail of how the humans had defeated a superior force. At the Luna Orbital Shipyard, Dr. Tanaka met with a group of new officers being assigned to deep space vessels. The lesson of the Perseverance was being incorporated into standard training. The galaxy thought our slow ships made us weak, she told them. They looked at our kinetic weapons and saw primitive technology. They didn't understand that we'd spent 2 centuries perfecting something they'd abandoned. They had forgotten that warfare isn't just about having the best weapons. It's about using the weapons you have in the smartest way possible. She pulled up the now famous footage of the projectile striking Zarthix's flagship. This shot was fired 10 minutes before impact. 10 minutes. The target didn't even know it was being aimed at. That's the advantage of kinetic warfare in space. Time becomes a weapon. You can fire at an enemy's future position, not their current position. A young officer raised her hand. But what happens when they adapt? When they learn to counter our tactics? Tanaka smiled. Then we adapt too. We have dozens of other strategies ready. The projectile grid is just one approach. We're working on gravity-assisted trajectories that can orbit a planet for years before striking. We're developing swarm tactics using thousands of tiny projectiles instead of a few large ones. We're exploring ways to use asteroids as kinetic weapons. She gestured to the shipyard around them. Every ship we build is designed with the same philosophy. Preparation beats improvisation. Planning beats reaction. Patience beats speed. These aren't new ideas. They're ancient military principles that the galaxy forgot because their technology let them skip over them. Another officer spoke up. Are we going to share these methods with the Confederation? Some of them, Tanaka said. The basic concepts, yes. The specific tactical applications, probably not. We want to be partners with the other species, but we also need to maintain our edge. Besides, I suspect that once they understand the principles, they'll develop their own variations. The Varen are already talking about using quantum calculations to predict enemy movements decades in advance. The Kreltar will probably focus on counter-tactics. Everyone will bring their own strengths to the table. The briefing continued for another hour, but the core message remained the same. Humanity had found its place in the galaxy, not by matching alien technology, but by mastering fundamentals that others had forgotten. Weeks later, Captain Vasquez sat in her quarters aboard the Perseverance, writing her official report on the incident. She had always preferred to write by hand first, before transferring her thoughts to digital format. Something about the physical act of writing helped her think clearly. The report would go into military archives and be studied for years to come. She wanted to make sure the key lessons were clear. The confrontation in the Viridian sector demonstrated several important principles, she wrote. First, technological superiority does not guarantee victory. The Kreltar had faster ships, more powerful weapons, and greater numbers. They lost because they didn't prepare the battlefield. Second, patience is a weapon. Every projectile we fired was part of a plan that took months to develop. While the enemy was traveling to the sector, we were already calculating their defeat.
Third, physics doesn't care about your technology level. A tungsten rod traveling at relativistic speeds will destroy a ship, whether that ship has energy shields or not. Sometimes the simplest solution is the most effective. She paused in her
writing, thinking about how close things had come to going wrong. If Zarthix had been more cautious, if he'd taken the time to scan the sector thoroughly before making threats, he might have detected the projectiles. If he'd brought more ships or different tactics, the outcome could have been different. But he hadn't. He'd looked at humanity's slow ship and primitive weapons and assumed victory was certain. That assumption had killed him. Vasquez finished her report with a warning. We won this engagement through careful preparation and by exploiting enemy assumptions. Future enemies will not make the same mistakes. We cannot rely on being underestimated forever. We must continue to develop new tactics, new strategies, and new ways of thinking about space combat. The galaxy is learning who we are. We must ensure we're always one step ahead of what they expect. She signed the report and transmitted it to Earth Command. Then she pulled up the tactical displays showing the Viridian sector. The projectiles were still there, thousands of them, each one following its calculated trajectory. Some would continue for months before requiring course corrections. Others would decay naturally and burn up in nearby stars. A few would travel indefinitely until they left the sector entirely. She had turned a region of space into a weapon that would persist long after the Perseverance had departed. Any ship passing through the sector would need to be aware of the projectiles, plan their routes carefully, respect the power of simple physics. It was, she reflected, a very human solution to a galactic problem. When faced with superior technology and overwhelming force, humanity had responded with patience, mathematics, and the fundamental laws of the universe. No exotic particles, no quantum tricks, just Newton's laws applied with precision and planning. The comm system chimed. It was Ambassador Chen. Captain, I thought you'd like to know. The Confederation Security Council has formally invited humanity to join as an associate member. It's not a full seat yet, but it's recognition that we're a power to be considered. Vasquez allowed herself a small smile. And all it took was one shot.